Reformed Church.
Just to get into the message here, I just want to start out by maybe explaining something from last week. And we were talking about from Isaiah 54. You can throw the verse up there. I don't remember the exact verse. It's toward the end of the chapter, probably the third to last verse or something in the chapter. But it says that no weapon formed against you shall prosper. And in particular, just the verse before that, he says I've created the smith, and he brings out an instrument for his work. He blows the coals of fire. And then he says, and I've created the destroyer to destroy. But then he says in the following verse, but no weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. And I'm not going to reteach on that, so I'm going to assume you already heard last week's message. But I explained that last week, that I believe that that's talking about demons that were used under the law for wrath and for punishment, and there are reasons for that. I'm going to get into a few more reasons for that in this message. This message will be a direct continuation of last week. But essentially what I was explaining was that the law was run by angels. We've been through all the proof for that. The law was run by angels, and in particular, for the accusations and the punishment under the law, from what I see, it was either done in part by demons, which are still angels, but if you want to call them fallen angels, it was either done in part by demons or exclusively by demons. I'm not sure, but almost every instance that I've seen of punishment under the law and accusation is being done by the devil or a demon. We went through a few of those last week just to show that, and there's a point to that, by the way. The point my point in pointing out that the law was run by angels, even demons, to some extent, and the new covenant was given through Jesus, is to make the same contrast that Hebrews 3 makes in comparing Jesus to angels, and to show that in as much as Jesus is a better representation of God, the only true representation of God, and therefore is better than angels, is so far that the new covenant is better and more of a representation of God than the old covenant. Because the people that arranged those two different covenants are so entirely different, it represents the covenants themselves. And so that's why it's so important. If you're asking, why are we going over all this? Why are we going over the fact that demons ran this or angels ran this? Because the law wasn't exclusively run by demons. It was run by even angels of God, which you can even tell that by Hebrews 3, because Hebrews 3 talks about angels and compares Jesus to angels, but he's actually comparing Jesus to angels of God. And so if you understand what we've been talking about, that would give you the clue right there that he's comparing two different covenants, and therefore the old covenant wasn't exclusively run by demons. But my point with all this is just to show you that the reason why you have to point out who is running these two different covenants is because it shows which one represents God and which one doesn't. Because this one was given by the Word of God, as John 1 calls Jesus, the Word of God that declares the Father. And this one was given by angels, of whom it is never said that they declare God, okay, or that they are the exact representation of God's nature, etc., okay? But anyway, with all that said, getting back to Isaiah 54, one of the demons, and I showed you from Revelation chapter 9, that the destroyer, I think the Hebrew word was shakath, if I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but that's how it's spelled. And the destroyer from Revelation 9, you see, is the king of the bottomless pit. So he's a demon, right? This is not like a heavenly angel. And the destroyer is a demon, and I told you that the smith, I suspected, was also a demon, or at least an angel, maybe more likely an angel. But it says here that if you just go to the previous verse 16, it said that I've created the smith that blows the coals in the fire, and I told you that I submitted this as a partial opinion right now, but I believe that the smith could be a particular angel that is in charge of or has the key to the bottomless pit. I gave you the scriptural evidence for that last week. And the smith brings forth an instrument for his work, and I've created the waster or the destroyer, that's shakath, the destroyer to destroy. And so what I pointed out from that is that I think the instrument that the smith brings out for his work, or I should say brought out for his work in the Old Testament, was the destroyer himself. That the smith perhaps, and again I'm submitting this all as a partial opinion right now, but that the smith perhaps is an angel that opens the bottomless pit, and then the destroyer under the Old Testament, and exclusively under the Old Testament, would be brought out as this instrument for the smith's work, and would be brought out as the instrument to destroy people under the law when they sinned. All right? Man, if you're just joining us right now, there's an immense amount of context that I'm not going to go through right now, but none of this is New Covenant, and none of this is God's will, and you're going to have to just listen to the old messages for that. But the one thing I just want to explain to you is that it is absolutely true. I didn't mention it much last week, but it's absolutely true that in the next verse where it says, no weapon formed against you shall prosper, when it says no weapon formed against you shall prosper, that is pretty evidently the same thing as the instrument being brought out by the smith from the previous verse, because it leads right into it. He says the smith brings out an instrument for his work, and then he says, and no weapon formed against you shall prosper. What's the weapon? I believe the weapon there is referring to the destroyer, and who formed it? I believe that, well, let me not even go into that right now, but at least the smith is the one said to bring out this weapon for his work. And when it says no weapon formed against you shall prosper, I do understand that that's typically just quoted as like a protection verse. Like if someone comes against you in life and they say, no weapon formed against me shall prosper. Now, let me just say, if someone's preaching on the fact that God will protect you, and they say, you know, we can walk through this world, and John 17 says that we can be kept from the evil in this world because no weapon formed against me shall prosper. Listen, I'll amen to that. I don't believe that that's the context of this verse, but I'll still amen to it because what you're saying is true. And I'm not saying that I approve of using a verse out of context, because then it hinders people from seeing what the verse really means. So it's not good to do that. But what you're saying is true. I'd rather listen to someone who's saying something true and using a verse that I know is out of context than to listen to someone who's using a verse out of context and lying to me. You know what I'm saying? So it's true that things in this world don't have to prosper against us, but that I don't believe is what this verse is saying. This verse, when it says no weapon formed against you shall prosper, just to clarify this, this is saying, I'm just going to say this is, rather than keep saying this is my opinion, this is saying that under the law, there was a weapon that prospered against Israel. This is being prophesied to Israel, as with the whole Old Testament. And he's saying that there's this destroyer, this weapon that the smith would bring out in the Old Testament, and it prospered against you. I mean, the law allowed it. God allowed it to prosper against those who willed to approach him by their works. That's how the law operated. Again, there was a reason for why God gave the law for this finite period of time. So this weapon did prosper against Israel. And God is prophesying the whole chapter long in Isaiah 54 of a new covenant. So he's telling them a new covenant reality, that the weapon that used to prosper against them, that the smith would bring out for his work, the destroyer, will no longer prosper against you in the new covenant, because Jesus will satisfy the wrath of God and will satisfy the wrath of the law, and the destroyer will no longer be allowed to go on a rampage and destroy people for their sins under the law. God would not even allow that anymore. Because why? Because Jesus has fulfilled the law. So when it says that no weapon formed against you shall prosper, this is an absolute. It's a definite, absolute thing that this weapon simply does not. This weapon, the destroyer, is not allowed to prosper against anyone today, because he is not allowed to punish people for their sins. Now, you may have a question, because I read you a verse from Revelation chapter 9 about the end time, the days soon that we'll be living in, where it talked about the destroyer coming up out of the bottomless pit, and these locusts coming out also and plaguing people and all this stuff. Well, that is not judgment for sin. That is released on the earth for vengeance against those that are harming the children of God at the end of the age. That is not punishment for sin. Just so you know, if you want to put it this way, the destroyer amongst all other demons and the devil, they are the world's daddies. They're owned. The world is owned by these people, these demons. Okay, people may not like to say that. That is the absolute truth. The devil owns people because of Adam's sin. They're stuck. As long as someone's in sin, in the devil's sin, he's got a hold on them. Now, they don't have to be there. Isaiah 61 describes unbelievers, or people that aren't born again, as people that are in a prison that has a door. And God can open that door, and they can leave at any time. So they're not stuck there because they have the sacrifice of Jesus as a way out. Nevertheless, that's true. So in the end of the age, if you're ever wondering about Revelation chapter 9, when it says the destroyer comes out from the bottomless pit, that is not canceling out the verse 16 where it says, verse 17 actually, where it says that no weapon formed against you shall prosper, because the destroyer is not going to be released on that day to destroy anybody because of their sins or for judgment for sins. That's being released because God is going to let the world's dads have at it for a while, for as long as they come against the children of God. Okay? That's why that happens in the end of the age. I understand that's not how that's taught. I taught a whole series called The Last Days where I go over this very specific example. Revelation and the plagues are typically taught that God has lost his patience or he's long-suffering but not forever suffering, and therefore God is just going to let people have it for their sins, and that's not the case. So anyway, I want to clarify that when it says no weapon formed against you shall prosper, this is talking to Israel, who at the time had this weapon, the destroyer, prospering against them, and he's saying in the new covenant, it's not going to be able to prosper anymore. Again, it's a definite, absolute thing. The destroyer is not destroying people anymore as wrath for sin. It's not happening anymore, okay? Again, Revelation 9 is only being done against unbelievers for defense of the church, and I won't even teach on that right now. So I want to clarify that. I hope that clarifies it a little bit, that's what that is talking about. Let me just explain this a little bit, because this is really important. It's really, really important that I was saying all last week that the law basically just gave the devil an opportunity to do what he kind of wanted to do already, and that was destroy people. The law is not bad. The law was just telling everybody, particularly Israel, here are the good things to do. And if you don't do these things, that deserves punishment. And then allowed punishment to happen. So the law was not bad. And I'm not saying, just hear me out on this, I'm not saying the devil cared about the justice of the law. He couldn't care less about the justice of the law or the commandments of the commandments of the law that were holy and just and good. He just saw that it gave him a way to destroy people, and he was eager to take occasion to accuse people and destroy people because, again, he couldn't care less about the law. He'll just destroy people any way he can, and he saw a means, watch this, he saw a means to use the justice of God under the law to accuse people and therefore destroy people. That's what he did. So I'm not saying the law is bad, but the law did justly require punishment during that period of time, and the devil, seeing that, took occasion and used that because, hey, if for that 1,500-year period of time, if injustice, destruction was like allowed on people, the devil's all for that. But the devil, again, we've been saying that the law and the destruction of the law does not represent God's heart. We've been saying that it veils God's heart, right? But funny enough, the destructive nature of the law is something actually that the devil wanted. Again, the devil didn't want the justice, couldn't care less about the justice of the law, but the destruction aspect of it, the fact that the law came and the letter kills, there's someone that doesn't mind stealing, killing, and destroying. There's more context to put with that verse, but there's someone who is a murderer from the beginning, as I quoted from John 8, which is the devil. And anyway, even if it's through something that is good, which the law is good, if it allows him to accuse and punish, he's all for that. The devil, let me just say this, it is an attribute of the devil to be eager to punish or destroy people for their sin. It is an attribute of God to use justice in any way he can to serve us and to help us and to redeem us and cleanse us of sin, okay? Which is what we see through the cross, right? What we see through the law is the devil, listen to this, I was just thinking about this during praise and worship. The devil loved accusing people so much under the law, he didn't leave until he was thrown out of heaven. That's a thought, right? Because you think, it's like the devil didn't just look at Jesus, because he was in Revelation 12, this is said in Revelation 12, when the devil's up in heaven accusing people before God, he didn't see Jesus come and say, oh, okay, I guess I got to stop now. No, he waited until God had to throw him out. And so he was, that's another evidence of his eagerness to accuse. And why was he so eager to accuse? Because it allowed him and his demons to punish people under the law. So there's an eagerness to punish, and that is what we said from, what is this, John chapter 9? Luke chapter 9. That Jesus said is the eagerness to punish or to destroy men's lives is not an attribute of God. He said that's of another spirit. We can just go there real quick. I don't want to linger too long, but verse 55, when the disciples saw that people had rejected Jesus and they were quick to want to destroy their lives with supposedly the punishment of God, Jesus rebuked them and told them, you don't know what spirit you're of. Which he's telling them that what they were saying was akin to the devil, not akin to God. And God allowed punishment under the law. So how could Jesus look at the disciples and tell them that their desire to punish somebody when they rejected Jesus was akin to the devil rather than akin to God? Because the punishment you see under the law is not something that God was eager to do. God wanted to cleanse people. It's in God's heart to cleanse people of sin and to give them life, to fix the problem in people, to heal the problem in people, not punish them for the problem. That's in the heart of God. And it's in the heart of the devil to be quick to destroy people. Whether that's through punishment or any other means, he doesn't care. And the quickness, the eagerness to destroy people's lives that he saw in the disciples, even through the law and even through punishment, he attributed that to the devil and not to God. So, again, there's a lot here. A lot of stuff that I'm still learning, and there's a lot of stuff that I have not seen the end of where all this stuff sort of takes me, but these are all true points, though. And that's what Jesus pointed out here. So that they didn't know what manner of spirit they were of in verse 55, and in verse 56 it says, for the Son of Man is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And the Son of Man, he's referring to himself, he's the one that represents God. Therefore, it's in the heart of God to not destroy men's lives, but to save them. Okay. Now, let me point this out, too. And I hope I'm not confusing anybody with all this information, but punishment is not wrong. Okay? Punishment is not wrong. But fixing the problem is better. All right? I'm not saying that punishment or punishing people is of the devil. That's why I'm trying to be careful with my words here. The devil is eager to destroy people. He don't care about justice or why it's being done. He just wants to destroy people. When the law prescribes commandments and punishment for it, that is just. Punishment is a just thing, but it is better to heal the problem than to punish people for it. Because when you punish someone, it doesn't make them better. I'll explain in just 1 second why punishment can be used as a good thing. But punishment is not wrong. But again, it's in God's heart to heal people of the issue and cleanse people of the sin rather than punish them for it. So let me just give you an example of this, of why punishment is not wrong. What punishment does, and I explained this in latter messages also, but what punishment does, all that it can do, is even take just like government. This would apply to punishment in any area, but with government, all that punishment does is it doesn't change anybody, obviously. If someone is doing something wrong, all that punishment, all that it's able to do is, for instance, when we jail somebody, we're basically just trying to keep them from society to keep the damage down. It doesn't cleanse them of sin. It doesn't make them not want to hurt other people anymore. But if you put them in jail, or even if there's a call to even eliminate somebody's life, because let's say they're a serial killer and they're taking other people's lives, all you're doing is damage control. That's all punishment can do. It eliminates the person out of view to try to keep everybody else as safe as possible. But again, it doesn't change anybody. Here's an opinion, but I really don't believe it's an opinion. I believe that if God was not able to cleanse people of their sin, he would have to punish sin. He would have gone with that method. Because what else do you do? If you can't change people and take sin out of people, I believe that God would have resorted to something that really was not what he wanted, but he would have resorted to punishment if he wasn't able to cleanse people. Because what do? Do you just allow everybody to just hurt one another and kill each other and steal from one another and do all these various different things? Or do you at least take one person out from amongst the rest so that people can kind of, again, for damage control reasons? And also what the law, what punishment does, is it disincentivizes people from all that sin that even burns inside of people. It de-incentivizes them to let it out. It makes people want to keep it in and not let it out for fear of punishment. But that's all the law and punishment can do. It can put people in fear of actually letting that sin out and acting upon their sin, but they still have the same sin. And even when they do sin, and punishment happens, it just puts them away from society, for instance. But it doesn't heal anything, it doesn't fix anything. But again, it's just damage control. But it's the best one can do when you can't cleanse people. And this is why it is right to punish sin by the government, because the government can't cleanse people. So all they can do is damage control. Now, what we can do is we can point people to Jesus where they can get cleansed, and that will help society a lot better than punishment ever could. If enough people knew Jesus, we would have to do very little to no punishing at all by the government, because everybody would be being cleansed and transformed of their sin. So hopefully all that makes sense. I'm not saying punishment is bad. I'm not saying punishment is of the devil. I believe that God would have had to resort to just punishing people for sin to do damage control if he couldn't actually change people. But thank God, through Jesus, God can cleanse people of sin, and that is the heart of God. The heart of God, the intentions of God, is to help people with where they're at and with their sin rather than just punish them for it. And so, again, I only say that because I just don't want it to be misconstrued that I say, like, punishment is of the devil. And if you see punishment going on, if you punish your kids, that's of the devil. No, that's an okay thing to do. When you punish your kid, you're putting them in a sort of, for their immaturity, in fear of doing that again. So if they're hitting their sibling and you punish them, they know, even if I want to hit my sibling, I shouldn't do that next time. So it puts them in fear of doing it again, and it's just damage control. And again, if you put them in a timeout and you separate them from their sibling, you're punishing them. But again, all that is not changing anything, but it's not wrong. Punishment is a godly thing that we do. For the government to punish sin in America, that's a godly thing to do from the standpoint of someone who cannot change people. So that is a bit of information I want to make sure that you understand. When I say that the devil is eager to destroy people, he used something that was good under the law. The law was good, and he used that because he just wanted to destroy people. He don't care about for what reason or any of that. All right. So let me just give you some scriptures here. We're going to go to 2 Samuel 12 in just 1 second. But funny enough, last week I preached the whole thing about how the law gave the devil an opportunity to destroy people. It was God's will to cleanse people and give them life, and it was the devil's will to destroy people. And the law gave the devil an occasion to do this. And I taught the whole message, and funny enough, I didn't actually even use the scriptures where I got that from. I just kind of got onto other things, and I didn't even use those scriptures. So I want to actually show you some of those verses. So you can see the devil using the law here in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 13. When David sinned with Bathsheba, you see, and this is needs a little bit of interpreting because it's not said plainly, but you can see the devil's eagerness, and he saw the law and how the law required accusation and punishment, and he went after that, and he was eager to fulfill that. Again, the devil was eager to do this even under the law. God was not eager to do that. But 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 13, a little bit of context. David had just sinned with Bathsheba, as I said, and he had killed her husband, and Nathan the prophet comes to David and prophesies against him under the law that there was going to be punishment for David's sin under the law, but David himself wouldn't die. Okay, that was the point there. And it says, and David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, the Lord has put away your sin, you shall not die, howbeit, or therefore because by this deed you have given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also that is born unto you shall surely die. You might have a question, because I kind of question this also. I know that even people under the Old Testament, if they were in faith in Jesus, they didn't have to reap the repercussions of the law. And David being a person of faith, I question even why there was punishment even here if David was in faith and all of that. But Old Testament saints is a little bit tricky sometimes to interpret, because an Old Testament saint could be a believer and then in unbelief. They could go from, I believe, forgiven of sins and then even unforgiven. And they can go back and forth depending on whether they were mindful of earthly things versus mindful of the Lord. So this is, I would assume, why David here is being punished at all for his sin, is because I assume that he got his mind off the Lord. I have proof for that after, if you want that. But verse 14, though, it says that when David sinned with Bathsheba, he gave great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. What this is talking about is the accusers. This is talking about the accusers under the law, the devil and his angels that would accuse people under the law, because that's why it says that by doing this deed and with David's sin, he was giving occasion, and that's why I kept using that word even last week, that the devil took occasion. He took opportunity through the law to accuse, and he was eager to destroy under the law. God was eager to do away with this destruction under the law and have his son be destroyed for our sins and give up the son that he loves for us. But this says that by this deed, he had given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. When it says the enemies of the Lord, again, it's talking about the devil and his angels here. And David's sin was an opportunity for the devil and his angels to accuse him before the Lord. What I love here, too, is that it calls the devil and his angels accusing David or blaspheming David the enemies of the Lord, which I just love that because they're not accusing God, they were accusing David, but God is for David, and he calls David's enemies who were opposing him his enemies. But you can see even that word occasion, that's why I was using it last week, that sin under the law gave the devil an occasion, an opportunity to accuse, which is what he wanted to do. It's not what God wanted to do. God did it. God allowed it, I should even probably better say, under the law for a particular period of time, but that's not what God wanted to do. That's what the devil wanted to do, was to destroy people and accuse. But it says that gave great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, and that's therefore why there was punishment to follow, because in heaven, the devil and his angels were accusing David for this. Now, I want to bring you to one more verse that is sort of similar to that. But Exodus 32, if we just start in verse 21, Exodus 32, verse 21, this is right at the foot of Mount Sinai, right after the law was given, and you see the same thing. You see the enemies of the Lord, or the devil and his angels, taking sort of an occasion or an opportunity under the law to accuse and to punish. And what happened was, while Moses was on Mount Sinai, the people of Israel had asked Aaron, Moses' brother, to make them a golden calf. And so Aaron does that, and it's literally the first commandment to not have any other gods before him, and they're breaking the first commandment, and Moses hadn't even come back down the mountain to even bring the 2 tablets yet. And so he comes back down, and Moses in verse 21 said to Aaron, what did this people unto you that you have brought so great a sin upon them? Now, just so you know, the law just started. So now there are repercussions for sin. There's consequences from heaven for sin. And so Aaron says, I was laughing pretty hard about what Aaron says here before I was reading this, and I just broke out laughing because it says, Aaron's reply, remember, he's the one that made the golden calf for the people. Let not the anger of the Lord wax hot or grow hot. You know the people, that they are set on mischief. So, first of all, just so you know, this is a Hall of Fame excuse right here. I mean, this is top 10 excuses in the entire Bible. He says, you know these people that they're set on mischief. They're mischievous people. He says, verse 23, for they said unto me, make us gods which shall go before us. And then, just for the sake of time, look at verse 24. And I said unto them, whosoever has any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me. Then I cast it into the fire, and there came out this calf. That is just the best excuse I've ever heard in my life. You know these people, they're so mischievous, and I just told them to give me their jewelry, and I threw it in the pot, in the fire, I melted down, and out came this calf. You're like, oh, wow, this is crazy how that happens. Just gold calves just jump out like that. But so anyway, I love that excuse, obviously sarcastically, but that's just hysterical to me. But after this great sin, in verse 25 it says, and when Moses saw, this is an interesting thing that doesn't really make much sense at first, when Moses saw that the people were naked, for Aaron had made them naked unto their shame among their enemies. Now, this is an interesting thing because I actually looked up, sometimes what I'll do is I'll use commentaries. I mean this sincerely, I really don't use commentaries to try to find the meaning of a verse because I just don't even want it in my head. But what I do is there are some commentaries that will make comments about like how something should be translated sometimes, and I will use a commentary to check up on like what are they saying, like how should this actually be translated. to see if I'm missing something about the Hebrew or the Greek. And so I actually looked at a commentary on this just to make sure, and I checked a bunch of translations to see if I was understanding this right. And the word naked there is just a weird thing. The Aaron, because if you look real quick at verse 21 again, it said that Aaron had brought a great sin upon them. Aaron calls them to sin. But then in verse 25, it says that Aaron made them naked. It says, unto their shame amongst their enemies. And the word naked it comes from a root that means to loosen. And while you could translate it naked, even other translations will say unbridled. He made them unbridled, because I guess they're trying to go for, like, maybe it means unbridled lust or something. And by the way, when I looked up commentaries, there was definitely, like, you could tell by the way things were written, like they didn't really understand what this verse meant. And but it comes from a root that means to loosen, but it can mean, by implication, to expose, which is why King James translates it naked, because it can mean to expose. And I'm telling you what, the right way to interpret this verse is the same way that I just read to you about that the enemies of the Lord were blaspheming David, because when he sinned, that's what the devil and his angels, the enemies of the Lord, were doing when he sinned. And this is saying actually the same thing. But Moses is so angry with Aaron, because what he's trying to tell Aaron here is he's saying, you have exposed the people of Israel now unto their shame. You've exposed them to their enemies. Now, it's weird, though, to just say enemies if this was talking about physical enemies, because there was no other enemies coming at them right now. There was no battle going on. There was no physical country or, someone invading. None of that was happening. So they're just at Mount Sinai by themselves. So to say that, he made them vulnerable, because that word naked, it again, meaning exposed, that is what it's talking about. It exposed them before their enemies. But like, what enemies? But especially when you put this together with what I just read to you before in 2 Samuel, Moses was so mad because he was telling Aaron, the law just started, and now you causing them to sin has made them vulnerable to the enemies of the Lord. And again, he's talking about the devil and his angels, which now we're able to take occasion through people's sin. And again, we're eager to do so, which is why Jesus told his disciples that an eagerness to punish, a heart set on punishing or destroying people's lives is not of him, it's of the devil. And that's why the devil was so eager under the law to destroy and accuse, and that's what this is saying. Moses, in particular, what he was saying was that by however many people, because all of Israel weren't the ones that were worshiping the golden calf, but Moses is telling Aaron, by allowing the people of Israel to sin like this, you've made the whole camp of Israel now vulnerable to punishment from the devil and his angels, or as he says it here, exposed or naked unto their shame amongst their enemies. Again, it would be weird to say enemies here if it were talking about someone physical, because there were no enemies around. Neither is there any account after this of any enemies coming against them. But this is true, though. If you keep reading, well, I won't even read all this to you. But what Moses has the Levites do, and this may sound drastic, but when you understand it correctly, it makes sense. Moses had the Levites, he told them to go and kill everybody that had bowed down to the golden calf. And you may say that sounds extreme, which today certainly that would be, but back then, Moses is so angry, he's like, this whole camp now is under condemnation from the devil and his angels, the enemies of the Lord. You've made us vulnerable now, so we need to quick eliminate everybody that sinned from the camp so that the camp of Israel is not exposed anymore. He was basically saying, eliminate the ones for whose sake the devil or demons would punish people for. Eliminate them so that we can be relieved of this condemnation that's about to come on us. And that's actually what they did. 3,000 people died out of the camp of Israel who had worshipped the golden calf, and he was doing it, again, as like damage control to say, at least let's spare the whole camp of Israel so that God's wrath, again, through the angels, so God's wrath would not be on the camp, and that's actually what they went and did, and they actually killed everybody. And again, but what I want to bring this back to is a stark contrast, though, to, he says that they were vulnerable to the enemies of the Lord. And again, God speaks of the devil's involvement with the law like this, or even to David saying that they took occasion to blaspheme David. And again, the reason why I want to show you that is to show you the eagerness of the devil versus what Jesus was eager to do. Again, he corrected his disciples, saying that they were of another spirit and saying that was an attribute of the devil. But if you read John 8, with the woman caught in adultery even, for instance, because keep in mind, David's sin was adultery and then murder. And when he sinned, the devil is said to take occasion. Again, the devil doesn't care about justice. He wasn't punishing so that justice would be served. No, he was just doing it because he was taking an occasion through the law to accuse David so that to come after David is what he was doing. The devil was eager to destroy. But knowing Jesus' heart, that when he came, he took punishment on us so that we wouldn't be destroyed. You see Jesus dealing with somebody who was caught in adultery in John chapter 8, and his reaction was so different than what you saw under the law. And what you see with Jesus' reactions, they brought him the woman caught in adultery. I'm sure we know this passage, but just for those that don't, they brought him the woman caught in adultery, and they put her before Jesus and said, the law requires that she be stoned. What do you say? Now, Jesus wasn't going to go against the law, so he didn't say she doesn't need to be stoned under the law. He just said, those that are without sin cast the first stone. In other words, if you're without sin and blameless, then go ahead. In other words, you can stone her if you're without sin, but he did that knowing that they had all sinned before, and they all deserved to die under the law. And he's saying, so if you want to really play this justly here, only if you're without sin, throw the first stone. And the Bible says that they went away, their consciences convicted them, and they went away one by one. And when he saw the woman, he was just there alone with the woman, and he said, woman, where are your accusers? Even Miss Lindsay wrote about that in Nothing Could Quench Your Love. He said, where are your accusers? And she said that there are none. And he said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. That is not the reaction you see under the law. The law is complete opposite to that reaction. With David's adultery, the law condemned David, and the devil was eager to oblige there to condemn David. And again, from the heart of God's standpoint, what you see in Jesus is you see the opposite reaction to really the same sin of adultery, and you see Jesus coming to not condemn the same thing. All right, let's see. Let me see what I have here. You know, I don't really want to take a whole lot of time for this, but I did want to give you the verses at least. I know I gave you the references last week, but let me just give you these just to prove that point. I don't really want to linger on this and teach this too much, but Malachi 3:10 through 11, particularly verse 11, he talks about their bringing their tithes into the storehouse and all of that, and it says that he would rebuke the devourer for their sakes if they brought their tithes in. And even the devourer, I don't know if that's a different demon or the same or whatever, but it does mention the devourer as being someone sort of like in charge of punishment also in the Old Testament. Again, so if that's, I wouldn't believe that's necessarily the same thing as the destroyer, but it mentions that. I just want to show you, just to reinforce that whole law arranged by angels concept. And then I'm going to actually, there's one other thing, and that is just Psalms 44. Again, I'm just going to explain this very quickly, but Psalms 44, verse 15, it says, my confusion is continually before me, and the shame of my face has covered me. It says, for the voice of him that reproaches and blasphemes by reason of the enemy and avenger. Okay, again, I just want to mention this very, very quickly. I believe that enemy and avenger is also referring to demons under the law that were accusing and punishing, and that's why it talks about the voice of him that reproaches and blasphemes by reason of the enemy and avenger. The reason why, I don't know if the avenger is the name of a demon or not, but I believe that is talking about demons or the devil and his angels in some way, just because of this verse. Last verse I'll just give to you on this is Psalms 8:2, is because in Psalms 8:2, it says, out of the mouth of babes and sucklings have you ordained strength. Jesus quotes this in the New Testament as saying, out of the mouth of babies you have ordained praise. So it is talking about the praising God here. And in regards to praising God, it says, out of the mouth of babes and sucklings you have ordained strength because of your enemies, that you might still the enemy and the avenger. And when it says, it's essentially saying that praise stills the enemy and avenger. And the reason why I believe that the enemy and avenger here is referring to demons in some way is because there's an interesting correlation with this, that when, for instance, when Saul was rejected by God, there was an evil spirit that was sent to Saul to torment him. And what he had people do is Saul had people go get David, and David would play his harp. And when he played the harp, the demon that was tormenting Saul would leave. It would actually respond to David. Now, I don't believe, again, some of this is an opinion, but I feel strongly that this is the truth of it, that I don't believe that it was David's harp playing that made the demon leave. I believe that David, who was a psalmist, that he was worshiping the Lord when he would play, and that worship or that praise that came out of his mouth caused the enemy and avenger to leave. Now, I don't know if this is just because the devil and demons just don't like praise so much that it just forces them to leave, that they would actually just leave a room and can't even take it out of their own arrogance or something like that. I don't know if it's that or if it's really that praise is a reminder of the Lord. And in the Old Testament, and particularly with Saul, who was rejected by God at the time, you could say he's an unbeliever at the time, because, again, the way that things could fluctuate in the Old Testament, that even with a quote-unquote unbeliever at the time who had really rejected the Lord, that the praise from David, again, I don't know if it's that the demon just didn't like it or if it's maybe more likely that when you praise God, it reminds you of the Lord, and just the manifestation of the Holy Spirit that was coming forth from David by him being reminded of the Lord through worship, that drove, the power of God drove out a demon. So anyway, there's a reason for worship, and in here it says it stills the enemy and the avenger. And so I don't have a full knowledge on that, but I suspect that is the enemy and the avenger is a reference to demons that punish people under the law. And so if you kind of take that knowledge, you don't have to go back there, but if you take that knowledge that we just learned from Psalms 8 and you apply it to what we read in Psalms 44, that talks about the voice of him that reproaches and blasphemes by reason of the enemy and avenger, if enemy and avenger truthfully are demons and devils, then therefore that would apply back here to say that those that were reproaching and blaspheming under the law were the enemy and the avenger. And so again, I don't know if it's a particular name for a demon or not, but all that said, the reason why it's important to understand these things is because I'm trying to contrast the ones that arrange the new covenant from the ones that arrange the old covenant, and to show you the difference there. One more mention on this. Even in the Old Testament, you can find this in Deuteronomy 19. I just wrote this down. There's even cities of refuge that if somebody sinned accidentally, they could go to these cities of refuge. And I suspect that possibly these cities of refuge and the whole situation there were symbolic of the fact that if someone sinned accidentally, it says that they could go to these cities of refuge so that, for instance, if somebody killed someone accidentally, the person of the one who died, their family, they would be angry with the person that killed their relative accidentally. So the Lord gave cities of refuge for this person who accidentally killed that person to run to these cities of refuge so that the family wouldn't be able to catch up with him and kill him. The Lord knowing that he'd only done it accidentally, but particularly the wording there is that so the avenger of blood in particular. It says, lest the avenger of blood pursue him. And so I think that whole thing has some symbolism there, where with the cities of refuge and the avenger of blood being maybe like a name for a demon or something like that, or an office of demonic powers under the law, etc. And showing something about maybe how like the Lord is a refuge from the avenger of blood or something like that. But anyway, I just give you all this information. Again, I wanted to go through a bunch more tonight just to show you all this stuff, just to contrast the law and to contrast Jesus. Maybe with just a couple minutes I have left, I can mention something to you that I might talk about next week, just because I only have a few more minutes. But maybe I'll just say this right now, that all of this stuff, when we've been talking about the ones who ran the law, the one who arranged the law, this, if you hearken back to what we went over in Hebrews 1 through 3, when it says Jesus is better than angels, Jesus is better than angels. In verse, I think it's Hebrews 1, if you could even just bring it up for me, It's Hebrews like 1:3, I believe. Hebrews 1:3 or 1:2. Yeah, it's Hebrews 1:3. Even if you could just, we'll start there. But when it says that who being the brightness of his glory, this is talking about Jesus, right? That Jesus is the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. Next verse. Being so much better than the angels. That just becomes so powerful when you understand what he's saying there. Because in verse 3, when it says that Jesus is the express image of God's person, he's not just saying that in a vacuum. He's not just letting you know that. Now, in other portions of Scripture, it talks about how Jesus represents God, and it might just be saying that just to make that point. But here, he's not saying that just to make that point. He's trying to say that Jesus is the express image of God's person and is, in verse 4, better than angels. That contrast there is to express to you the covenants and for God to express to you which covenant represents his person. And so this is the only reason why I've been trying to go through all this stuff about who gave the law, and demons were involved with the law, and angels were involved with the law, but Jesus wasn't the one that gave the law, and Jesus wasn't the mediator of that covenant, is because what we're trying to point out here is all the condemnation, all the things that we see in the law, that none of those things are God's heart or intentions toward people. Even when these things were being done under the law, it still wasn't God's heart. And this is why even from Elijah, when we went over how Elijah saw the wind and the fire and the earthquake, and it said the Lord was not in these things, but a still small voice. And that's where the Lord was, in the still small voice. Even behind, what we learned from that even was even behind Mount Sinai, and all the horrific sight that you saw at Mount Sinai, and all the wrath and all the things that behind that, in the heart of God, God may have been doing a lot of things under the law by angels, but in the heart of God was someone who is gentle and humble, was someone who did not desire to destroy men's life, but to save them. And you have to see through all that stuff. And that's why it's so important to see that demons and angels and all these other people were involved with the law, but Jesus is missing from mediation under the law or arranging the law in any way. And that's why Hebrews is making that point so strongly. He's saying that Jesus is the express image of God's person. He's the one that gave the new covenant, and he's better than angels because he's trying to convince us that the law does not represent God's person. Otherwise, Jesus would have given that covenant, and of course he didn't. One last thing I'll share with you is that what I want to share with you in next week is from Jonah, maybe. But in preparation for that, if you want to read Song of Solomon 1, you know, it's short enough. I could probably just read this to you. Song of Solomon 1, let's see, if you just even start with verse 1. If you remember from our Song of Solomon timeline, in Song of Solomon, I believe that it shows and demonstrates the goodness of God and also whose desire it was to punish under the law, whose heart that really represented to destroy people's lives. And it says in Song of Solomon 1:1, it says, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's, it says, let him kiss me with the kiss of his mouth, for his love is better than wine. And basically, for the sake of time, let me just bring you to verse 5. If you watch the Song of Solomon timeline that I went over in the We the Temple series, I go over all this. But in verse 5, this is actually referring to under the law, before Jesus came. And this is talking about people under the law. And it's not, I am black, but comely. O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon, look not upon me, because I am black, and the sun has looked upon me. This is sort of describing, I believe, like her work under the law. And again, under the law, note it says, my mother's children were angry with me, and they made me keepers of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. And notice even here, Solomon is the picture of Jesus in this book. And when it can I just tell you this too, just to be honest with you? I feel like I'm just scratching the surface with a lot of this stuff. Like what I'm telling you is true about what happened, but I feel like there is so much more involvement with the devil, and there's more to understand about this because, for instance, but it's worth me telling you because it does show you and it does emphasize the heart of God. Solomon is a picture of Jesus in this book. And it doesn't say Solomon was angry with her under the law. My mother's children, which I told you, it seems irrefutable that that is talking about angels under the law, which we now know, of course, demons were also involved with that. But the angels under the law, because this actually perfectly parallels Acts 7, because in Acts 7, Stephen says, the law was given by the disposition of angels, and it says, and you have not kept it. Here she says, my mother's children were angry with me, and they made me keeper of the vineyards, and my own vineyard I have not kept. Like, my mother's children, being the angels, gave me work to do, and I haven't kept the work. And then later on, you see Solomon coming, and the representation of Solomon, when he comes, which is Jesus, is like, this is the day of the gladness of his heart when he could marry this woman, which was referring to believers. And man, the stark contrast you see, again, I can only give you what I know so far, so I'm just kind of doing to the best of my knowledge to give you this. But I'm just trying to sort of strain every single point of knowledge that I have to at least show you that God makes such a point of telling you, like, why would God write, my mother's children, referring to the angels, that they were angry with me under the law? And like, it doesn't say Solomon was. It just, again, this goes back to even what we were talking about in 2 Corinthians 3. The law veils the heart of God. You're not seeing the true nature of God when you're seeing the law. You're not seeing God's will for people. Man, I hesitate to mention it again, but I just feel like mentioning it again, that, again, another spirit. That Jesus said that was of another spirit, to be eager to punish and to want that kind of methodology to destroy men's life, even for their sin. He's like, that's not even what I want to do. I told you at the beginning of this message, I believe that God would have had to resort to that for damage control if he couldn't cleanse people, but thank God that he's able to, and he took that route, and he was eager to do that. Because it's not God's will to destroy people's lives. Even when we punish people, we shouldn't want to destroy people. You punish people because it needs to be done for the sake of other human beings for damage control, but you shouldn't want to punish your kids. You shouldn't want to do these things. And even under the law, God didn't want to punish people. People wanted that methodology with God, and so God let them do it so they could see the stove's hot, don't touch the stove, so they could try that out. But that is not what God wanted. And you even see here, there's just, like, I look at this and I'm like, there's more to that than I even understand, even what I've taught so far. My mother's children were angry with me. And it blames the wrath of the law on the angels, and it says Jesus wasn't involved with that because Jesus represents the heart of God. God's heart is not the punishment of the law. God is not the one that desires to destroy people. And the last thing, I got 5 minutes, which is a perfect amount of time. Just to give you a little preview to what, at least God willing, what I think I might share next week is, if you read the book of Jonah, we went through the Jonah timeline actually once already in this series. But I didn't touch on a lot of things because I wanted to share them now. But if you read the book of Jonah, we know Jonah represents Jesus. Jesus said he was the greater Jonah in the New Testament. Jonah comes, he gets thrown into the sea. The word sea means hell or the underworld for 3 days and 3 nights, and then gets spit back up, which is a prophecy just showing that Jesus would go down to the underworld for 3 days, 3 nights, and then he would be raised to life, and he would come back upon the earth, right? And so people that don't believe the book of Jonah, it's actually kind of funny, right? Because its prophetic accuracy shows it's inspired by God. And if it's inspired by God, it's also historically accurate. You know what I'm saying? Like, if there was something wrong with the book of Jonah, because they say, oh, no one could survive in the whale or something like that, then it wouldn't have been prophetically accurate. If it was just a man that messed something up and wrote a fairy tale, it wouldn't have been prophetically accurate if it wasn't of God, but it is prophetically accurate, which shows of God, which shows also historically accurate. But anyway, Jonah represents Jesus there, and what you see is, they asked Jonah, what must we do to you that the sea might be calm for us? Because before that, the wrath, because that represents, when the sea is tempestuous and stuff, in Jonah, that represents the wrath of the law. And when Jesus came to the people of Israel, they were still wrath. And it says that it was the sea that was tempestuous against them. The sea is talking about hell or the underworld, which would refer to, that's where what I believe like the home base of the devil and his demons. And it's saying it was the sea that was tempestuous against the people of Israel. And it says the sea was raging against them. And when Jonah is thrown overboard into the sea, representing the death of Jesus, it is the sea that is calm. Like, it's not heaven that becomes calm. It doesn't say that heaven, like we're talking about it like it's of God. So that's why I know there's even more to this. Now, I recognize that this would be referring to the fact that that the source of punishment under the law is saying, which I believe is further proof to everything we've been talking about, that the source of punishment under the law was coming from the underworld. Hence the destroyer, the king of the bottomless pit, and all this stuff coming up. And again, they were happy to oblige to do it. But, so not only does it confirm that, but I mean, I just believe there's even so much more for me to see from this, because the wrath that it says Jesus was fulfilling and calming was just like Song of Solomon, my mother's children were angry with me. Jonah says the sea was angry with them. It literally says raging. It means angry. The sea, referring to the underworld, which would be the place of demons, is saying it was angry with them. But Jonah, representing Jesus, what did he do? Man, let me just end here. It was in the heart of the sea, of the demons of the sea, of my mother's children. It was in their heart to destroy people's lives, and took occasion through the law to blaspheme and to destroy, making people vulnerable to punishment. It was in their heart to do it. And while God, I'm not trying to escape this, God gave the law for a purpose. It was not in his heart. And that's why you see Jonah, the representation of Jesus. What did he do? He calmed the sea for the people. And how did he do it? By being thrown into the sea himself. He offered himself, and I'm saying symbolically, he offered himself so that the sea would stop raging for them. This, I believe, is also symbolized. I just don't know the symbols yet, so I won't teach it yet. I believe this is also symbolized where the disciples and Jesus were in the boat, and it says the waves beat against the boat, and I believe that is punishment under the law because it parallels Jonah. And Jesus, what did he do? He calmed the sea and said, peace be still, and the waves were calm. And so it is the waves of the sea, which we'll talk about this later, maybe next week. It was the waves of the sea that raged against Israel under the law and against people, and it was Jesus that calmed them for us. And I mean, it just gets me when it says, when they said, what must we do to you that the sea may be calm for us? And Jonah says, throw me over. And man, that is good, right? That Jesus did something for us. Like, Lord, what must we do to you that the sea would be calm for us? And Jonah, the same way that he volunteered to get thrown over, Jesus volunteered for us to get thrown into the underworld, to die for us, that the sea would be calm for us. And that is just a thing for the whole world. Even for the people that don't know it right now in the world, the sea is actually calm for them. They don't realize it. Now, they're going to get a lot of repercussions just of their own making, but not from God. Not from God. The sea is calm for them because the greater Jonah threw himself over for us, and just a lot of cool things. But so again, I wanted to throw out every bit of information I had to you. So I'm going to kind of close this particular portion of the series here, but I just want to throw out all that to you just so that you can see the contrast. Jesus is the representation of God, better than angels, and Jesus is the heart of God, right? And angels are not.
We hope you enjoyed this message from Reformed Church. If you have, please share this with someone else and help us get this uncommon truth out to the world. If you'd like to support this good news, you can do so at reformedchurch.com/give. Also on our website, you can take advantage of our free messages, articles, and even full discipleship courses. Start reforming your mind now at reformedchurch.com.